So thank you everyone for joining us for the webinar on the theme recent updates in the management of lung cancer. We would like to not waste any time and I will just introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Dr. Sangeeta Parthiban, who is a medical oncologist from Bangalore, who belongs to the ESI hospital. So without wasting any time, over to you, ma'am.
Thank you everyone. Thank you AstraZeneca for this opportunity. I'm audible, right?
Yes,
Hello?
ma'am, you're audible. Yes, ma'am,
Okay,
you're audible.
okay, okay. I'll go straight to the topic. Thank you. So today's my topic is to understand EGFR and T790 mutation testing in non-small cell lung cancer patients. So with a disclaimer of AstraZeneca that it is all from the published literature, I move ahead to the next slide. So contents of the below presentation would be the frequency EGFR mutation frequency in India, EGFR mutation detection in lung cancer, post progression to EGFR TKIs, T790M mutation detection post progression, the guidelines recommendation for T790M mutation test, and few takeaway points. So the first slide. So all of us know. So this is the EGFR gene, which has extracellular domain. So we have an extracellular domain and an intracellular domain. So the intracellular domain contains the tyrosine kinase domain, so which leads to normal cell growth, proliferation, and differentiation. So what happens if it gets mutated? If the EGFR tyrosine kinase domain gets mutated, you have constitutive activation, which leads to cell proliferation, invasion, angiogenesis, metastasis, and also inhibition of apoptosis, causing the tumor growth. So EGFR mutated tumors, mutated EGFR is activated, thus causing tumor growth. So we know after learning about what EGFR gene does, so we see what are the driver mutations which we are looking for in lung cancer in the EGFR. So this is again the EGFR gene where we already know most of us are already detecting, so trying to diagnose the tyrosine kinase mutation domain. So it is usually between the exon 18 to exon 21. It is widespread to exon 18 to exon 21, which are the known mutations where we can have targeted agents. So among them again, exon 19 being the most common, followed by exon 21, and with followed by exon 20 and exon 18. So this was a meta-analysis which was published in Oncology 2016. So where they have shown this was limiting to Indian ethnicity. So this is frequency of EGFR mutations in Indian setting with various techniques. If we see there is most sensitive ARMS PCR direct sequencing, which is which probably is not preferable right now with the PCR technique and also IHCs, we can see the prevalence of mutations can be around approximately 26.25 to begin with, or 23 to up to 51.8%. To see that, which is with the most sensitive technique, there is more chances of picking up these EGFR mutations. And the most common among them in all of the studies were approximately was mostly exon 19 followed by exon 21. I think this is our TMH data with the Vanita Nonora et al. So that time where PCR was around 35%. So what are the diagnostic materials that we use for EGFR? So all of us mostly prefer the tumor biopsy samples, and then if not feasible, we do also refer for cytology samples, which could be fine needle aspiration or thoracocentesis sample, or bronchoscopy washings. So preferred sample which will be a tumor biopsy. If not feasible, definitely a cytology sample can also be sent for examination. We know that most of the samples need to have at least point the tumor to the normal cell ratio needs to be at least 0.1% and preferably 1% to test these mutations. So anything less than 1%, usually probably the pathologist is not happy and I would ask us to resample the patient. So we could see, and that's because again why tumor biopsy sample is preferred is this is other data where we can see how much of cancer cell content is there in ratio to the normal cell content. So we could see most of them in the paraffin embedded blocks and in the transbronchial biopsy specimens. The content of the cancer cells are relatively higher than in any kind of fluid samples or sputum samples. So what determines the choice of EGFR mutation testing method? So we have various methods, and all of us, most of us, are using the PCR and the NGS method as of now. So we usually get the reports with these. So whenever we are looking for a targeted mutations, I think most of us are getting through the PCR technique. So what are the different things probably the pathology would take into account? Is one is the sample type and the relevant expertise or the lab facility, and whether you want to know the targeted mutations or do you want to prefer all mutations. So these are the three things that we take into factors. So one, in sample type, if there is a high tumor content, I think most of the testing methods may pick up. If there is low tumor content, we would like to have a more sensitive test, preferably a sensitive test. So again, if the lab is expertise in finding out, then probably using the methods that lab is expert. If they are not, then definitely we could select a EGFR mutation test kit to determine. And again, if we are finding out a known mutation, we can either use these screening methods, or which can include the HPLC, or which is the NGS, which we are usually following now, or the targeted methods like PCR, if we want to know which mutations, already known mutations. And if we want to find out all mutations, probably a screening method with the enrichment technique would be better way. So once we have already found out that the EGFR mutation, we have used a patient at EGFR TKI at some point of time between, so we find them progressing in spite of the TKI. So, of which the most common mechanism for the acquired resistance is, we all know, is that T790M mutation, where we're concentrating today's presentation. So this was a study by Yu et al, where where this was around, I think, 155 patients who had progressed following the upfront TKI. They could see the most common mutation is T790M. So approximately 63% had this T790M mutation, followed by HER2 mutations in 13% and MET amplification in 5%, and a small proportion of 3% had small cell transformation. So very negligible component had, multiple, like HER2 with T790, or small cell transformation plus T790, or MET amplification. These all are approximately less than 4%. So what are the various samples that we can use for testing? I mean, at the time of disease progression, I think more than upfront, only at disease progression, we are more limited with the tissue samples, or have other issues with the patients where we are not able to send the tumor biopsy sample. So what are the other samples that could be sent? Or we already know still tumor biopsy sample remains the gold standard, but other samples with a new sensitive technique, probably a cytology sample if the tumor biopsy is not available, or a liquid biopsy like a plasma sample, or even a CSF sample if there is evidence of leptomeningeal disease can be sent. So what happens at progression, and what are the pitfalls that we see during testing of this? So most of us, either if we are sending a tissue biopsy at the second time, either the tissue sample is inadequate for us to find. So either the type biopsy tissue or diagnosis is insufficient to find the resistant mutations. Other than that, we also come across something called the intratumor heterogeneity. So we could see here the picture demonstration, but there's a small clone of T790M sitting at the time of presentation. And that resistance, we could see they have multiplied, and most of the cells are having around T790 mutation. So what happens next? So if we are not able to get the sample, then we are looking for a blood sample or the liquid sample. So we know that we look for the cell-free DNA, tumor DNA cells, which we are looking for in the liquid biopsy. So you can also subject them to the liquid biopsy sample. So once, if the cell-free tumor DNA shows a EGFR T790M resistant mutation, the report can be considered a valid report, and they can be started on patient with osimertinib. So if the patient is T790M negative, still you cannot be probably sure or very sure. So you need to definitely plan for a tumor biopsy, that is the tissue biopsy for the resistant mutation, and then take your plan. So again, if it's positive, you start the patient on osimertinib titration. So if it is negative, possibly consider another alternative test. So a positive T790 mutation may obviate the need for biopsy, And there are also enough data to suggest that a positive T790 mutation corresponds to the benefit with osimertinib. So a patient who is positive could be started on osimertinib. In contrast, if plasma genotyping for T790 is negative, you would prefer to do a repeat biopsy. So there are guidelines when we are using this liquid biopsy, what would be an internal control? So some of the studies have shown that the upfront mutation, if it is present with the liquid biopsy sample, that could be probably taken as a a plasma sample which could be informative. And if suppose if there is no upfront mutation found in the sample, probably it's still uninformative. And again, so you would probably still consider a repeat plasma sample or a tissue biopsy if the sample is either uninformative or inconclusive. So there's some guidelines, probably the pathologist and the oncologist together, Indian consensus guidelines for molecular testing. So any patient who progresses on EGFR directed therapy after first line EGFR therapies should be tested for resistant mutations. So predominantly T790 followed by HER2 and MET. So it should be performed when the oncologist decides to change the ongoing therapy. Confirmation of T790 mutation is important before initiating the osimertinib when the patient has progressed on the first line TKI. Repeat biopsy may be challenging with poor performance status. If repeat biopsy should be performed to confirm negative or inconclusive liquid biopsy test, and preferably use a sensitive molecular assays like ARMS PCR. So these are ARMS is just a PCR based technique, and also ddPCR is nothing but a digital droplet PCR, which is more recommended for when the tumor content is less. So the guidelines recommending rebiopsy and testing at disease progression. Now we know that they approved liquid biopsy approximately in 2016. NCCN also recommends both. Either of it could be used at tissue biopsies, though still remains the gold standard. And definitely NCCN also recommends that if tissue biopsy is not feasible for any reason, then we could also use a liquid biopsy, and both would be a complementary rather than absolute. Tissue biopsy would be considered still as a gold standard. ESMO also says the guidelines to repeat a biopsy to identify the T790 mutation so that patients could be started on osimertinib if indicated. So I think that's again the ESMO guidelines. So what we could do, so because we are having these problems, so about finding about having invalid tissue or inadequate tissue. So the higher the when we integrate both the cell-free tumor DNA finding technique and the tissue-based methods, we're obviously overcoming some of the limitations. Like so, in tissue testing, the portion of some of the patients may have either invalid test or the tumor DNA is below the detective limit of detection. Like I already mentioned, at least the ratio of the tumor to normal cells should be more than 0.1% and preferably up to 1%, at least for us to identify the mutation testing. So either it's insufficient sample or the patient refuses to undergo, or the position of the tumor is such that biopsy is not feasible, then the plasma DNA would definitely help as a complementary test. So again, if the plasma DNA comes negative, we would still prefer to do a tissue testing. So both together could possibly help us in identifying more number of patients who could benefit from osimertinib. Other important thing that probably we look across is most of us we do and then find out they don't have a mutation, we don't find a T790 mutation. Could be some of the factors, could be either it is a spatial heterogeneity or it's a temporal heterogeneity of the tumors, that's either within the tumor or at different tumor sites you may have heterogeneous sites. So this picture we can see, so this is one metastatic site where you have no T790M clonal cells, whereas the other side you have a T790M clonal cells. So possibly at this site you may get a negative report and this side may get a positive report. To some extent, possibly liquid DNA, liquid biopsy, so where you have a tumor shedding, can overcome this heterogeneity. But possibly we have to wait for a standardized labs and also should look for reproducibility before we consider liquid biopsy for all the patients. So heterogeneity can occur within the same tumor and also between the metastatic sites, so intratumoral. which can lead to negative biopsy results that may not represent the patient's disease. So, considering gold standard tissue-based techniques, we know it is highly sensitive to help identify the common mutations, and it's a common standard testing method. And the other pitfalls would be not all patients at time of progression would be able to undergo biopsy either because of the performance status or the tumor location or the small biopsy samples. So are the potential collections and also the drawback of heterogeneity of the sample, like has been mentioned. So these are the advantages and considerations with tissue-based testing. So with this, with considering, so we've spoken about how EGFR acts and what are the mutations that we see in upfront and what we do on progression, how to diagnose an EGFR T790 mutation. So with this, few takeaways would be take an informed treatment decision to get a EGFR testing at diagnosis. Tumor tissue still remains the gold standard for successful EGFR-M testing. So after an initial response of EGFR TKI, most patients will experience disease progression, and guidelines definitely recommend a T790M testing at progression, which is the most common mechanism of acquired resistance to EGFR TKI. And sample quantity and integrity are key to successful testing at progression. So tissue and plasma testing plays a complementary role. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I will now introduce our second speaker. Our next speaker is Dr. Chaitanya Krishna, medical oncologist from Hyderabad. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. Without wasting any further time, I hand over the mic to you, sir.
Good evening, all. I thank for the opportunity given to me. So let us start my talk on new standards in the treatment of resected EGFR mutated early lung cancer. So we know that 85% of the lung cancers are NSCLC and 30% of the patients will have a resectable disease, either stage 1B, 2 or 3A. And surgery is the main treatment in these cases. And hello, am I audible, Kashish?
Yes, sir, you're audible, sir.
And adjuvant cisplatin-based chemotherapy is the recommended treatment for these cases. Even though there is adjuvant chemotherapy, but the DFS hazard ratio is 0.84. That means the outcomes in these cases need to be improved. The recurrence rates in stage 1B at 5 years is 45%, and it can go up to 75% in stage 3 disease, where the need comes when further need comes regarding the EGFR mutation-based treatment. The prevalence estimates of these EGFR mutations, according to the stage, are almost similar, that is ranging from 30 to 50%, and Asians will have higher rates, that is 30 to 40%. And in the advanced cases, in the advanced settings, we know that EGFR TKIs have a reasonable benefit, and the same benefits can be explored in the early stage cancers also. Based on that, ADAURA trial is being designed, where osimertinib as adjuvant therapy in the resected stage 1B to 3A cancers were taken who are EGFR mutant. It's a random 1:1 randomization between osimertinib and the placebo arm, where it is stratified by stage, EGFR mutation status, and the race. The treatment is being continued till the disease recurrence or the completion of the treatment, that is 3 years, or any discontinuation criteria is met, and followed up once in 6 months for 5 years, then yearly. The cases included were more than 18 years who got operated for 1B or 3A disease with a central confirmation for the EGFR mutations. And if they have received the postoperative adjuvant chemotherapy, is allowed for 4 cycles, and they should have a complete surgical resection, unlike a segmentectomy or wedge resection. And prior use of radiotherapy, chemotherapy, or EGFR TKIs are exclusion criteria. The baseline characteristics between the placebo arm and the osimertinib arm is being matched in all the characteristics, including the histology, the EGFR mutation status, and the adjuvant chemotherapy, whether received or not. The results in this trial showed the osimertinib improves the DFS compared to the placebo, and there is a significant reduction in the risk of disease or disease recurrence or death with osimertinib with a hazard ratio of 0.17. After 2 years, there is around 89% for the osimertinib arm and 49% for the placebo arm. That shows that 83% significant reduction in the disease recurrence. And when you take the overall population where the stage 1B disease is also included, where here the primary endpoint was DFS in stage 2 and 3A disease, whereas overall population where stage 1B disease is also included, where 80% reduction in the risk of disease recurrence or death, which is statistically significant. You can see here around 20 months in stage 2 and stage 3A disease, the median DFS for the placebo arm, and 28 months in the when you include overall population, but it's not reached with the osimertinib arm. The DFS benefit is consistent in almost all the stages. The maximum benefit was seen in the stage 3A disease. The forest plot, all the characteristics, all the hazard ratio spots are being placed well away from the null line of 1, showing that significant benefit with osimertinib favoring the osimertinib. And among them, the smokers and the stage 3A disease patients and exon 19 deletions and adjuvant chemotherapy received patients, they have got the maximum benefit compared to others. The overall survival is not yet reached, it's not yet matured. The other EGFR TKIs which were tested in this setting, the SELECT and RADIANT trial, where erlotinib was used after adjuvant chemotherapy, it showed a significant DFS benefit. And in the EVAN trial, it was compared with adjuvant chemotherapy. Erlotinib was compared with the adjuvant chemotherapy with a DFS benefit. In the gefitinib trials, VR19, where gefitinib was compared with adjuvant chemo, there was after adjuvant chemo, there was no DFS or OS benefit, but in other trials, there was a DFS benefit. But these benefits are not substantial to translate into approval or change in the clinical practice. Surpassing these results, there is ADAURA trial where osimertinib has shown a very significant DFS benefits. So that the DFS events which occur, it can be a loco-regional or the distant, and loco-regional recurrences, they do better than distant recurrences, obviously. And because the pharmacokinetic profile of the osimertinib, where it penetrates the CNS better than other EGFR TKIs, we can expect it can reduce significantly the distant recurrences, especially the CNS. In the trial, 11% had the DFS events. Out of them, 38% were the distant recurrences in osimertinib arm, whereas in the placebo, 46% of the DFS events were seen and 61% had a distant recurrences, which is a very poor prognostic factor. And these are the distant recurrence sites of distant recurrences, 11 in the osimertinib arm and almost 39 in the placebo arm. Coming to CNS DFS events, CNS recurrences were seen in 6 patients in osimertinib arm and 39 patients in placebo arm. The overall population, when you take the overall population, CNS DFS was significant benefit was seen with osimertinib where it was not reached versus 4 years in the placebo arm with a hazard ratio of 0.18. When you come to the safety profile, as osimertinib is being extensively used in advanced lung cancer, and we are all well versed with the toxicity, it's a well tolerated drug compared to the other EGFR TKIs. When you compare with the placebo, similarly in this trial also, very minimal grade 3 and grade 4 toxicities, adverse event profile was acceptable. And most of them had grade 1 and grade 2 toxicities rather than grade 3 and grade 4. When you do the subgroup analysis, that is the patients receiving postoperative chemotherapy, how they benefited with osimertinib. Almost all the patients with the stage 2 and stage 3, that is 70 to 80% of the patients received adjuvant chemotherapy, platinum-based chemotherapy. And the patients in the overall population, that is stage 1B, 2 and 3A, people who received adjuvant chemotherapy, who received adjuvant chemotherapy and osimertinib, they had a DFS of, median DFS was not reached versus placebo where it was around 22 months. And without adjuvant chemotherapy, it was 33 months. It is contrary to our belief that people who received adjuvant chemotherapy did bad, but because of the number, the majority of the numbers have taken adjuvant chemotherapy, and people who got selected for adjuvant chemotherapy, definitely they have a poor tumor prognostic markers, obviously having a poor survival. And that is the reason to have this contrary results in this case. So almost all the stages have benefited from osimertinib arm. The major benefit was seen with the stage 3A disease where adjuvant chemotherapy was not received with a 0.1 hazard ratio. And almost all the cases, it was like 0.1 to 0.2 hazard ratio, which is statistically significant. When you take the 1B disease, stage 1B disease, who received adjuvant chemotherapy, very few in number, had a median DFS with placebo was 4 years. It was not reached with osimertinib. And who didn't receive, that means they have a very good tumor prognostic profile. They didn't receive any adjuvant therapy and they did well with both placebo and with osimertinib. When you come to stage 2 disease, who had chemotherapy, that is like major number of patients had chemotherapy, they had a median DFS of 30 months with placebo. And without chemotherapy, DFS was 22. Even here, it is very less difference is found just because the numbers are high in this arm where adjuvant chemotherapy was received and they have a poor tumor prognostic profile, causing them leading to poor prognostic survivals. And even the stage 3A disease, where they received the chemotherapy, majority of them received the chemotherapy, the median DFS with the placebo was only 1 year, whereas with osimertinib, it's almost like 40 months. Even without adjuvant therapy, they had a DFS with placebo around 1 year and similar DFS benefit with the osimertinib. The patient reported outcomes, the health-related quality of life, it was like well accepted. It was done every 24 weeks, and it was like the compliance was much better, like equal with both placebo and with osimertinib as expected. And as well, the time to deterioration of physical and the mental components, there are no clinically significant, meaningful deterioration in the osimertinib arm. It was almost equal with the placebo arm. To summarize, in the ADAURA trial, adjuvant osimertinib is the first targeted agent in the global trial, which showed statistically significant and clinically meaningful improvement in the DFS in patients with stage 1B to 3A, with 80% reduction in the risk of disease recurrence at the death, with 89% of 2-year DFS rates and a hazard ratio of 0.2, clinically meaningful improvements in the CNS DFS, and well-established safety profile. As well, it has a meaningful DFS benefit observed with or without adjuvant chemotherapy, which is like 0.16 and 0.23. And higher disease recurrence rates were observed among the patients in the placebo arm who received adjuvant chemotherapy, the point which I had made. For tumor prognostic profile, that's the reason they had a poor DFS curve, Kaplan-Meier estimates. Overall health-related quality of life was well maintained with adjuvant osimertinib arm, and adjuvant osimertinib will provide a highly effective practice-changing treatment for patients with stage 1B to 3A, EGFR mutant NSCLC after complete tumor resection. And to take home message, osimertinib will be like a treatment-changing trial. This ADAURA trial is a treatment-changing trial, and even the standard of practice will change in EGFR mutant NSCLC, even though the patients may not be able to tolerate the adjuvant chemotherapy. Definitely, they can go for osimertinib, having shown a very good, significant DFS benefits with or without adjuvant chemotherapy. I thank for the opportunity given.
Thank you so much, sir. We'll now move on to our first panel discussion. Our first panel discussion will be moderated by none other than Dr. Smita Saldana, who is a medical oncologist from Bangalore. And I invite her panelists, Dr. Prasad Ishwaran, medical oncologist from Chennai. And I also request our two speakers, our chairperson, our two speakers, Dr. Chaitanya Krishna and Sangeeta ma'am, as well as our chairperson, Dr. Pavitran, to please join the panel. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity. So I hope my panelists are there. Dr. Sangeeta and Dr. Krishna, please join in.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so this is basically focused on the management of early lung cancer. So as we all know from what we have discussed so far,
Ma'am, have you shared your screen, ma'am?
Yes, it's not visible?
Ma'am, it's on the slide 5-year overall survival outcomes decrease.
That's right.
Okay, sure. Sorry, ma'am.
So the 5-year overall survival outcomes in lung cancer, with the increasing stage in resectable, it goes on decreasing. So as we see here, in the stage 1A1, the 5-year overall survival is almost 92%. And as the stage advances, in stage 1B, we see 68%. And with stage 3A, 3B, it goes on falling further down, 36%, 26%. So the first question to the panelists is, how often you see patients of stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3A in your routine clinical practice? We'll start with Dr. Prasad.
Yeah, maybe in the past 1 year, I had only 2 patients with a very early stage, and almost like 80% of them would be either with pleural effusion or breathlessness, or there will be stage 4 disease.
I think that's right, sir. Most of us see more than 70% to 80% are in the advanced stage. The early stage is very less. And usually they will even sometimes present to the surgical oncologist first.
Yeah.
Dr. Chaitanya, what about you in your practice? Or Dr. Sangeeta? Are you there, Dr. Sangeeta?
Ma'am, I agree that it's only 20% I see early cases and 80% are advanced.
Yeah, right. So even in our practice in Bangalore, I'm at Kidwai Memorial Institute of Oncology. It's a regional cancer center. So you're also more than 75% are in the advanced stage. The stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3 are less than 20 to 25%. So do you insist on clinical staging or invasive pathological staging for all your early lung cancer patients when you see your lung cancer patients? Any particular when you want to do clinical staging and when you would insist on invasive pathological staging? Dr. Prasad?
So right now in our institution, we do a dual imaging modality. We are looking at the use of FAPI along with FDG PET. And probably FAPI is able to pick up any lymph nodes which are not picked up by the routine FDG. And it could clearly differentiate between the inflammation and as well as the metastatic disease. Something lighting up on FDG, if it doesn't pick up on FAPI, then probably it is more of inflammation rather than a secondary metastatic deposit. And we do the mediastinoscopy. We would always suggest the thoracic surgeons to go for a mediastinoscopy, get a frozen done of all those suspicious lymph nodes before they go in for a lobectomy or a pneumonectomy.
So would you consider going for EBUS, or you would go directly for an invasive mediastinoscopy, or will EBUS be sufficient?
EBUS, we don't have the facility to do EBUS in the current institution. So we ask the surgeons to help us out.
Yes. What about Dr. Chaitanya in your practice?
Yes, ma'am. Like in the pre-treatment evaluation, we include pathological mediastinal lymph node evaluation by either of the methods which are available. Generally, I do in 2 institutes. Government institute, we generally go for pathological mediastinoscopy based. The surgical modality. Wherever it's available, we go for other non-invasive, less invasive methods.
Yeah, Dr. Sangeeta, are you there? So I think it's very important that we collaborate with the pulmonology and the surgical oncology in collaboration, and we need to do a clinical stage, invasive pathological staging, specifically for a central tumor or when there's a discrete ILR node involvement, N1 or N2 involvement. And preferably, if it's possible, EBUS is available. Always EBUS is much easier to do with lesser comorbidities. So we can go for the EBUS. Now, if you have a patient of stage 1B, a patient is diagnosed as stage 1B, how would you proceed with this patient? Dr. Chaitanya?
For them also, we need to evaluate pre-treatment evaluation, including the pulmonary function test, bronchoscopy, and pathological evaluation of the lymph nodes. Then FDG PET if not done earlier. Then if the negative mediastinal nodes are operable, I'll go for surgical treatment, resection.
Yes, I think right. So for a stage 1B, if it's possible, always operable, always go for surgery, and always you can consider for going for a lobectomy. That is always, it can be the VATS method or the robotic assisted method, which is now preferred. And usually if they are done in a good center with a high volume number of VATS cases, the resection with the negative margins are very high. So surgery alone will be the first modality of treatment. Now, if it's a stage 2, how will you manage? Dr. Prasad?
So most commonly, we would go with the surgery followed by adjuvant chemotherapy.
Yes.
We generally do not get this positive margin. So we generally do not do port and radiation in a medically fit patient.
Yes, right, sir. Right. So I think stage 2 also, as you rightly said, we would go with surgery and followed by adjuvant chemotherapy. And if it is a stage 3A, now will your management change in a stage 3A patient?
So stage 3A is going to be a difficult task to exactly identify that stage 3A patient. Stage 3A is going to be much more less, and the surgeon's role in stage 3 is going to be much more difficult than chemoradiation. So we would suggest the patient to have the overall survival discussions happening, the advantages of going in for extensive surgery, mediastinal dissection, and if at all, sometimes they would need to go in for chemoradiation as an adjuvant treatment protocol also. So it's going to be a combined discussion with the surgeon as well as the patient to have a kind of a decision, whether consensus, whether to operate these patients or to go in for chemoradiation or followed by durvalumab.
Yes, I think in stage 3A, the role for the discussion with the surgical oncologist comes and the radiation oncologist comes much more. Yeah. And whenever it is a disease where it is not operable upfront, maybe we'll have to give neoadjuvant chemoradiotherapy or chemotherapy and then reassess them for if they are operable feasibility for surgery and then take up for surgery. And for both stage 1B, stage 2, stage 3A, what is the role of adjuvant chemotherapy? Would you advise for all these 3 stages adjuvant chemotherapy, sir?
Yes. We have the pathological risk factors like LVI, yes. PNI, the role of lymph nodal dissections, number of nodes positive in the dissection, the grade of the tumor. So all these needs to be considered when we propose the patient for adjuvant chemotherapy.
So yeah, as we know, this Anita trial was the first trial which showed the benefit for adjuvant chemotherapy in stage 1B to stage 3A, and it was done with vinorelbine and cisplatin. It showed a 5-year OS benefit of around 8.6%. And then we have this LACE meta-analysis of 5 trials. And in this pool data, again, it showed 38% 5-year overall survival benefit was around 5.4%. They were all 3 stages, stage 1B, stage 2, and stage 3. So for stage 1B, if there are high-risk features, definitely we have to give chemotherapy, adjuvant chemotherapy. Stage 2 and stage 3, definitely all of us will consider giving adjuvant chemotherapy. In stage 1A, we would not consider. Now, the benefit of adjuvant cisplatin and your vinorelbine is associated with the stage of disease. As you see in this chart, the stage 1B, the adjuvant benefit is only 3%, with the stage 2, 10%, and stage 3 around 13%. So stage 2 and stage 3, definitely you should give adjuvant chemotherapy. Now, what would you do in a case a patient refuses surgery, or if there's any comorbid condition and surgery is prevented in early lung cancer? Would you still, what is the other modality of treatment we have for such patients? Dr. Prasad?
So if it's contraindicated, we would go with SBRT, and now that this proton therapy is available in Chennai, so that is one modality which probably is a little more promising than the photons.
Okay. So you have had any experience of proton therapy in this early lung cancer, sir? Your patients?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. So I think when you, Dr. Chaitanya, any thoughts?
Yes, ma'am. If it's a medically or patient is not willing and the mediastinal nodes are negative, I would go for definitive RT if it's node negative disease or a definitive chemoradiation.
Yeah.
Not positive.
So in such patients,
we can go for RT. Instead of going in for a conventional fractionation of 5 to 6 weeks radiation, the whole treatment can be completed within about 3 to 5 days, depending upon the size of the tumor.
Yeah. So if the tumor size is less than 3 centimeters, and we can always go with SBRT, which is a high dose fractions, around 1 to 5 fractions, and it gives you a local control rate of almost 90 to 95%. So that is the advantage of SBRT. So I think, as rightly said by Dr. Prasad, we would go ahead with the SBRT for such a patient. Now, any comments on R0 resection? I think this was basically meant for this oncologist. Unfortunately, is not able to join the panel discussion. So normally when you see your patients post-surgical resection, what is your experience, sir? Have you seen mostly R0 resection?
Yeah, we don't have a thoracic surgical oncologist, but the cardiothoracic surgeons do operate on our lung cancer patients, and they are quite liberal in removing the lung.
So most of us, I think they would go with R0 resection. Most of the surgical oncologists, not the
or pneumonectomy. They don't go with segmenectomy.
Right. What about Dr. Chaitanya? Anything, your comments?
Yes, ma'am, I agree with that. I have never seen a positive margins till now.
Dr. Sangeeta, are you there? Okay. So next question is, are stage 3B resectable? Now we told till stage 3A, we all know it is resectable. In stage 3B, are they resectable? Any characteristics you would look for to look for their resectability?
That's predominantly the invasion and the presence of the contralateral lymph nodes and the feasibility and the experience of the surgical colleague to go in for surgical resection. And moreover, in stage 3B, the going in for surgery would also result in giving adjuvant radiation or chemotherapy, as well as with the use of novel IMRTs and the newer radiation techniques available, the respiratory motion gated technique, 4D radiation therapy. So we could deliver radiation much more better in stage 3B and the advanced cases. So in more of stage 3B and more, it's preferred to go in for concurrent chemoradiation rather than subjecting the patient for surgical resection.
Rightly said, sir. I think stage 3B is better to go always for concurrent chemoradiation rather than using all the three modalities and giving them more toxicity. In case of R1 or R2 resection, what would you do next? Would you recommend re-resection or would you consider going for post-operative radiation therapy?
In theory, we would talk about re-resection, but in practical scenario, asking the patient to go under knife again, it's quite a big challenge.
So I think we would consider going for post-operative radiotherapy. So there is a post-operative radiation therapy has no sure improvable survival benefit for patients with a negative margin, but for patients with the N2 subgroup and in a positive margin, you can consider going for the post-operative radiation therapy. So in recommendations for the adjuvant treatment of non-small cell lung cancer, if it is stage 1A, after post-resection, observation is our modality of treatment. Stage 1B and stage 2A, when it is node negative again, we will discuss regarding observation or need for giving chemotherapy. So for stage 1B with high risk features, that is lymphovascular invasion, depending on the grade of the tumor and the size of the tumor, we will consider giving chemotherapy, adjuvant chemotherapy. Stage 2B, stage 3A, we will go for chemotherapy, adjuvant chemotherapy. And usually it is the platinum-based doublet for 4 to 6 cycles. The adjuvant therapy as of now is not guided by our molecular testing. Now, any role for neoadjuvant chemotherapy, chemoradiotherapy, this we already discussed in stage 3A. There is a role for neoadjuvant chemotherapy. Any other tumors, sir, we would consider giving chemotherapy or neoadjuvant chemoradiotherapy, specific subgroup in the early lung cancer? Dr. Prasad?
Yeah.
Chest wall involvement, or if there's a pan-coast superior sulcus tumor, would you consider giving chemotherapy?
Yeah, in T4 disease, we would consider giving chemoradiation. But again, end of the day, with all those infiltration and see, it all depends upon the institution where we are working. So like regional cancer centers like Kidwai or Tata Memorial, we do have a dedicated thoracic oncology team who are having the support and the facilities to take care of the post-operative setting. So it is advisable to go in for chemoradiation followed by surgery. But in most of the private centers, we don't have facilities. That is the practical difficulty. And we do not have a thoracic surgical oncologist everywhere available in the country, except in specialized centers. And it's most commonly the cardiothoracic surgeons who would take care of all these lung cancers in general.
Yes.
So it all depends upon the colleagues availability and the exposure to the chemoradiation or surgery.
Agreed. Dr. Chaitanya, your thoughts?
Yes, ma'am. Like non-invasive T3 and N2 positive, where we can't do definitely chemoradiation. In those cases, I may consider for induction chemo followed by an RT. Remaining all, I would prefer go for definitely chemo RT.
Yeah. I think in a very small subgroup, we will consider going for chemotherapy followed by trying for operating surgery. So one of the things is any stage 3A disease with a single station N2 involvement, or if they are superior sulcus tumor, we can consider. The next question is, do you routinely test for EGFR mutations in your early stage non-small cell lung cancer? Dr. Prasad?
Yeah, after this recent FLORA trial in which, where when you have this role of adjuvant osimertinib,
Yes.
And we have started doing reflex testing in all these specimens.
Okay. And are you recommending the adjuvant therapy, sir, based on the results, if it comes positive?
Yes,
Okay.
we would suggest them to go in for an
And usually you are using the first generation TKI. Dr. Prasad? Dr. Chaitanya, are you there?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
So we routinely started doing this EGFR
sorry.
for all of the early cancers also. And the major problem now we are facing is like the benefit which we see even without adjuvant chemotherapy, whether we have to directly go for EGFR TKI, osimertinib, or we have to give 4 cycles of chemo followed by osimertinib. There I am stuck. 2 patients have recommended adjuvant chemo, but they, because of toxicity, I have stopped with 1 cycle, then started on osimertinib. And even with the results, I'm convinced more to have a single agent osimertinib rather than giving followed by adjuvant chemo.
I think it is the data will be too early for us to say that we can skip giving adjuvant chemotherapy because we don't have the OS benefit still, right? So
Right.
what benefit is the DFS benefit? So I think from that point, we would still consider giving your adjuvant chemotherapy, followed by, for patients who are high risk, definitely consider adjuvant therapy for 3 years. I think the benefit of chemotherapy benefit is significant in this subgroup of patients. So if they're tolerating, I think definitely we should give them. That is my take on it. Dr. Prasad, are you there? What would you recommend? Would you recommend skipping the adjuvant chemotherapy and going for only osimertinib? I think guidelines do not say that as of now, but yeah, it's a tempting option for all of us since osimertinib or your TKIs are oral therapies. So you can get away without any much toxicity in these patients. The next thing is driver mutation testing. Are you doing it on the biopsy sample or the post-resection tissue sample, Chaitanya?
Resection, ma'am. Surgery is done. I think I would prefer that.
Yes. So I think that's rightly said. If you have always, because tissue is always important for us. So if there's a post-resection sample, always we will do it on the post-resection sample. Only when there is, if it's in the upfront setting, you're trying to do a molecular testing in the initial prior to surgery, then the question of biopsy in the biopsy sample it comes. So the most key guidelines as of now do not currently advocate for molecular testing in the adjuvant setting, but as since the recent March 2021, osimertinib was approved as adjuvant therapy in India, and NCCN also recommends doing molecular testing in the adjuvant setting. We are started in most of the cancer centers, regional cancer centers, and most of the multidisciplinary centers. They have started doing the molecular testing in the adjuvant setting in the early stage cancer. And is DFS an acceptable endpoint to change your clinical practice? Now, Monday morning when you're going to your practice, if you have a patient of stage 2A, would you consider, and patient comes to you, patient has undergone surgical resection, so would you consider giving your adjuvant TKI? Chaitanya?
Definitely, ma'am. It's becoming like one-to-one Viva, ma'am, rather than panel discussion. Fine. So definitely I'll recommend, ma'am. And DFS benefit is, I'm convinced enough for that, in this setting. Definitely we have to wait more for overall survival benefit to get it. But I'm convinced with the, the advanced, in the advanced malignancies, how we are happy with EGFR TKIs, definitely in the adjuvant also, we will be in future.
So the data what you presented, it showed a significant benefit of, 0.17, 0.12. The DFS.
Yeah.
So I think with this, definitely the benefit for DFS seems very good. I think all of us, it all depends on the financial toxicity. If the is acceptable, we all should consider using it. So with the osimertinib, the 3-year DFS was better than the 5-year OS in the stage 1B to 3A subgroup. So with this, I will end my panel discussion. Thank you to all the panelists.
Thank you so much, Smita ma'am. Thank you, Prasad sir, and thank you, Chaitanya sir, for joining the panel. We'll now move on to our next session. Our next speaker is Dr. Meher Lakshmi, Senior Medical Oncologist from Hyderabad. Ma'am, are you there?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Please, ma'am, you can share your slide. Please go ahead, ma'am.
Thanks for the introduction. And is my screen visible?
Yes, ma'am. Your screen is visible, ma'am.
Is it in the full screen mode?
Yes, ma'am. Now it's in full screen mode. Thank you.
Are the slides changing?
Yes, ma'am. The slides are also changing.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Today we'll be discussing about the decisions that needs to be taken when we choose a EGFR TKI in metastatic non-small cell lung cancer. So, what parameters determine our choice of the first line treatment in a patient who is an advanced NLCLC who is EGFR mutated? First, let us discuss about the progression-free survival. If we compare, if we cross trial comparison, if we make amongst all the three generations of EGFR TKI, we know the first generation EGFR TKI produces PFS around 9 to 11 months. Second generation afatinib around 11 months in LUX-Lung 7 trial, and other trials around 13 months. Dacometinib in Archer 1050 has shown PFS around 14.7 months. And coming to FLORA trial, osimertinib has shown impressive PFS around 18.9 months. So, should we really consider PFS as an endpoint? If we see the separation of curves in the three important drugs, that is LUX-Lung 7, the dacometinib, Archer, and the FLORA, if you see the separation of curves, in the afatinib trial at around 12 months, there is separation. In the dacometinib, as well as 6 months. But if you see the FLORA trial, there's immediate separation of curves, indicating that it's a potent drug. So do we really need to consider PFS? Perhaps yes, because PFS is one which doesn't depend on the other lines of therapy. In the TKI studies which we have seen in the earlier TKI, where comparison has made the chemotherapy arm, OS benefits was not shown because of crossover. So if we just consider PFS, this doesn't have an impact based of the other line therapies, and a potent target therapy can be let into the market if the PFS is good enough. So if you see the FLORA trial, immediate separation indicates it's a more robust, more potent drug which can be considered based on the PFS. The next slide, coming to overall response rate. If you see the overall response rate in afatinib versus geftinib, overall response rate, the afatinib is around 70%. Dacometinib in the Archer trial is around 75%. And if we see osimertinib, it is around 80%. So should we consider overall response also as a factor in choosing? Perhaps yes, because if we consider a drug which is more potent, producing more overall response rates, we are bent towards using that drug. So the most important most important factor in choosing a drug is the overall survival. If you see the overall survival, there are no other TKI with a shown overall survival benefit apart from osimertinib. If we see the overall survival, median OS around 38.6 months is an impressive hazard ratio of 0.79. The median OS is more than 3 months. So if we compare the LUX-Lung 7 Archer 1050, so afatinib, there is no improvement OS reduced of afatinib. Coming to dacometinib, number-wise, there is an improvement in overall survival. But in the Archer 1050, a hierarchical gatekeeping procedure, this analysis was used for hypothesis testing, and when overall response rate was not statistically significant, a formal statistical analysis for overall survival was not made. So, though theoretically there is an improvement in overall survival with dacometinib, but the statistical analysis was not done because that was not statistically designed. So if we see, osimertinib is the only drug which has shown overall survival benefit, and 30% were still receiving osimertinib at the period of 3 years. So more potent TKI, longer duration of response, perhaps yes. So next is coming to CNS disease. This is the CNS disease. Not many studies have included patients with CNS metastasis. So if you see the FLORA trial alone, which included patients with CNS metastasis, if we see the PFS curves in both arms, one with CNS metastasis and one without known or treated CNS metastasis, there is a PFS benefit even in the arm with CNS metastasis. The impressive PFS around 15.2 months. This is much higher even compared to the other TKA studies. And if we exclude the patient with CNS metastasis, the PFS is around 19.11. So this is FLORA is one study which has shown their studies designed for intracranial CNS PFS also. We study the CNS progression rates. The median CNS PFS is not yet achieved in osimertinib arm compared to the standard of care arm. So if you see the other TKIs, CNS responses was not assessed with any of the studies in afatinib. These patients were excluded when we see LUX-Lung 3, 6, or 7. And a CNS response was not assessed. Whereas in decometinib arm, the patients with brain metastasis were excluded. So osimertinib is the only study where the CNS response was also assessed. The patients were included and the response rates were also assessed. Next important point which we need to consider while choosing a TKI is the safety, which is very, very important. If you see the Archer trial, around with the use of decometinib, around 63% of the patients had grade 3 or 4 adverse events. That means almost around 2/3 we can say. And then 30% of the patients had grade 3 AS with afatinib. But if you see with osimertinib, around 18% of patients had grade 3 AS in the FLORA trial. So if we see the TKI toxicities, afatinib, the skin toxicity is around 9%, decometinib 14%, whereas in osimertinib is less than 1%. Even the diarrhea is also less than 2%. This we can anyway know from the mechanism action, because osimertinib specifically targets only the mutant form, sparing the wild type of wild receptors. So coming to dose reduction. If we see a patient who we see patients were requiring regular dose reduction, we try not to use the drug, because closely monitoring and dose reducing is quite cumbersome. And if you see the data in LUX-Lung 7, the adverse effects leading to dose reduction were seen around 41% or nearly 42% of patients requiring afatinib. Even in Archer trial, because of toxicity, around 66% needed dose reduction. Whereas in FLORA trial, with the use of osimertinib, the dose reduction rate is just around 40%. So next important point is quality of life. This is a very, very important point, because if the patient has good quality of life, only then he will use the drug continuously. Otherwise, patient will have immediate treatment breaks, and he will not be trying to use the drug regularly. If you see the FLORA trial, almost all the patients had good quality of life from the graph we can see. So what about the sequencing? So why not start one and use subsequently and the TKA? So let us see how many patients in our practice use subsequent TKA. If you start with 10 patients who are EGFR mutated and was started on first or second generation EGFR TKA, you see around 73% of EGFR mutated patients, they receive second line therapy. And after this, after progression, around 60 to 70% they undergo testing for T790M. And around 50% of those with the valid test will be T790M positive. So if we start with 10 patients, only around 3 patients will be eligible for second line osimertinib. So 7 out of 10 patients who start on a first or second generation EGFR TKA, they will not be able to receive osimertinib in second line. And it is not possible to predict who will develop T790M resistance. So if you see the access to second line therapy, approximately if you see around 1/3 of patients, 1/3 of patients will not have access to second line. They are done with the first line only. They take first line and they do not receive, either because of rapid progression or they do not turn up, or for any other reasons. So 1/3 of patients, they do not receive second line therapy. What is the real world evidence of T790M after afatinib? If you see the Japanese study, around 43% of 37 patients, they have acquired T790M after first line afatinib. In the Taiwanese study, 48% of 42 patients who were rebiopsied after afatinib failure had acquired T790M mutation. And in another Taiwanese study, 28 FRT treated patients in T790M was identified in 32% of the patients. So less than 50% of patients put on afatinib, they acquire T790M mutation. That means they do not go into second line treatment. So whatever sequencing, some sequencing might not be an option because for everybody, because not everybody will receive second line treatment. And as we know, in lung cancer, tissue is always an issue. So we might not get tissue, and liquid biopsies are not always successful. And so we should think twice before opting for sequencing. So what are the uncontrollable factors in sequencing? That is toxicity, occurrence of T790M, the rates of the size of progression, concurrent morbidity, and the patient's choice. Patient might be willing or might not be willing. So the last but not least, the most important, one of the most important factor in choosing TKI is the financial aspect. All of us are bent towards using first-line TKI based on finances only. This is the only factor where osimertinib is losing. So if you see the NCCN guidelines, the preferred first-line therapy for EGFR mutated non-small cell lung cancer is osimertinib. So in concluding, we have seen multiple factors that need to be considered in choosing first-line EGFR TKI, and osimertinib has shown benefit in almost all the factors considered except that financial factor. And upfront use of potent TKI provides maximal advantage to the patient. So in oncology, there's no question of reserving the drugs to next line. Let us use the potent TKI upfront. Thank you. Thank you for your patient hearing.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Now we'll move on to our panel discussion. Our moderator is none other than Dr. Anita Ramesh, who is also our program director. Over to you, ma'am.
Yeah, can you hear me, Kashish? Kashish, can you
yes,
hear me?
ma'am, we can hear you. Yes, ma'am, we can hear you.
Okay, you can put the slides and you
yes,
invite my panelists
yeah.
also.
So, ma'am, Dr. Suman has joined us. Dr. Bobin and Dr. Vishal will not be able to join us. Dr. Vishesh will join us soon, ma'am. Can I request our chairperson also to join the panel?
Yes,
and
Dr. Suman, we'll
ma'am
start.
as well.
Yes, ma'am. Hi.
Yeah, Dr. Meher Lakshmi to join, please. Dr. Suman, thank you being with us. Dr. Vishesh, we are expecting you. Okay, thank you very much. As we move on to the case-based discussion on the stage 4 EGFR mutated non-small cell lung cancer. Let's take this patient is a 54-year. Next, please. 54-year males, smoker, lung adenocarcinoma, exon 19 deletion, type 2 diabetes but under control, good performance status. Patient has shortness of breath and pleuritic chest pain. Next, please. Suman, what would you like to do?
Next thing.
This is the scan. Dr. Suman, please.
I would like to
Suman,
do the entire panel.
Patient has an adrenal gland metastasis.
Brain MRI is
Okay.
already done.
Which site would you like to choose the biopsy from?
Yeah,
brain MRI. No, brain MRI is negative for NETs.
Yes, sir. So I preferably take lung mass itself.
Patient has right adrenal gland metastasis.
Preferably from the lung.
You want to do it from the lung mass. Okay. Next, please. Lung itself. Doctor, what are the panel that you would like to do? Next, please. Yes, please. You would like to do a histopathology? Dr. Suman.
Ma'am. So panel.
Dr. Suman?
Yes, ma'am, I'm here.
Yeah, tell me what pathology would you like to do?
Pathology, immunohistochemistry, I would like to do the standard panel, that is PAN-CK, P63, TTF1, and even neural markers if none of them are.
NAPSIN. Yeah, and do you need a CNS scan if there is no CNS symptoms?
Yes, ma'am, I routinely do. If it is a small cell, I routinely do. Otherwise, I reserve it for if they have symptoms.
Yeah, Suman, you're right. In the small cell, you will definitely do. But now, if you see the NCCN guidelines, because of the increased incidence of CNS disease, they are also doing an advanced cancer of non-small cell. But then if you have done a PET, everything gets covered. Next, please. Next, please. Okay. There's some Next, please. There's chance of missing on the small brain mets, and that's the need for that. Why do we need for a scan? Dr. Meher, which are the patients whom we would go from brain scan before the first line of therapy? Dr. Meher Lakshmi.
Madam, we are not routinely, yes, madam, we are doing PET for all the patients because PET is much economical in our institute rather than doing the CT scans and bone scan with CT and bone together, we do a PET scan. And unless the PET says that there is something, PET usually doesn't cover the brain, but they give a hint. Only in those patients we scan the brain, or if they're symptomatic. Other than that, routinely we don't ask for brain imaging.
Separately. But if you see some of the guidelines, they're asking for the scanning of the brain. PET means everything is covered, is easy. I also agree with you. It's much cheaper modality than to do the scan separately. Yes, next please. So Dr. Suman has said he will do the immunohistochemistry and the histopathology. And Dr. Meher and Suman, anybody you can take. What are the other molecular markers would you like to do?
Madam, routinely we ask for EGFR, ALK-ROS, PD-L1. As of now, we are not doing MET or BRAF, but we are trying to include them. And some patients we tend to do that NGS panel, which covers all the genes, which is which coming
Dr.
up
Suman.
recently.
Yes.
Yeah, NGS. Dr. Suman, what do you do at MEOT?
At MEOT, we do these 5 markers. That is EGFR,
Yes.
ALK-ROS, BRAF, and PD-L1. Apart from that, if I counsel the patient, if they're ready, we'll do NGS. Because practically it is very easy to convince them in the first line to do NGS rather than the progress.
Later on, you feel like NGS to be done. Okay, next please. Okay. Do you really wait for the results to come? And
Ma'am, if the patient is not very old age, I mean, if they're not very frail, I'll start with 1 cycle of chemotherapy.
okay.
Otherwise, I
And
would
then wait for the mutation.
Yes, ma'am. Otherwise, I would wait for 3 weeks if they don't have brain mets. Even if they have brain mets, I will send them to radiation and wait.
Okay, so this patient is 76, needs best supportive care. There's a discussion also going on whether any actionable mutation is there. And also, we also need to discuss with the patient and relatives for a shared decision. Next, please. Now, what would be your treatment choice for this patient having known that there is an EGFR mutation?
This exon 19, ma'am?
Yeah.
Type of mutation. So, mostly I prefer osimertinib, ma'am, in the first line. If you're going for TK.
Why?
There's the longest, for the first line, I think it has a very promising itself. In the name of, in terms of both PFS and OS, there is a strong separation of curves as I discussed in the previous speech. So
Yes, and Dr. Meher Lakshmi, your thought process, because someone straight away said osimertinib.
Yes, madam. If the patient is affordable, I will straight away go for osimertinib.
So you believe they get the best at the first go?
Yes, first best. Though we know that there are other combination of EGFR TK, the combination therapy, that is combination with VEGF inhibitors. If you see the response rates, they are very good. But if he's a comparator arm, even that response is also very much higher. So we can see that is separate set of population. We don't know whether that can be extrapolated to our population. What I strongly believe is with the least toxicity, choose the best drug.
Yes. If you see the sequencing with osimertinib and the other drugs, and also the TKIs and the chemotherapy, that gives you one of the best overall survival data. But what you said, absolutely, I agree with it. Osimertinib sequencing with the other TKIs has given us more than 36, even 39 months as per the last meta-analysis goes. Next, please. What was the rationale for the choice? Yes, we discussed. Next slide, please. Okay, see, if you see the NCCN guidelines for 2020, so if you have an EGFR mutation and prior to your first systemic therapy, or you discovered during the therapy, preferred drug, if you see the guidelines, is osimertinib and category 1. There are other choices like that of alotinib, apatinib, gefitinib, dacomitinib, which are also category 1, but has written as other recommended drugs. and sometimes erlotinib bevacizumab, and we also have the data of ramucirumab plus erlotinib approved. Now, Suman, you have so much of choices with you. Many of them are category 1. Okay, so what will be your preferred? Anything you prefer, or whom will you give afatinib? Any particular subset for dacomitinib? What happens to erlotinib and ramucirumab? Which subset of patients would you like to give?
Ma'am, if the patient is willing and is ready for osimertinib, the rationale is the most common resistance comes in the form of either brain mets or T790M. So this is the major subgroup that we lose after 1 year. So if we can answer them in the first line, I do with osimertinib. So regarding the other drugs like dacomitinib, this is for uncommon mutations. Except for these two common mutations, any other mutation comes, I'll be preferring either afatinib or dacomitinib. I have a very narrowed experience with dacomitinib. I have used only in 2 patients, but I think the side effect profile is better with dacomitinib rather than afatinib. So that way, ramucirumab with erlotinib, the results are promising, except especially L858 subgroup. So if that is the case, then the PFS in the trial with erlotinib and ramucirumab, it's a very interesting trial in which it is 19 months. So
19 months, yes, the L858R, and that's on 19 has shown very good results.
Yeah, I'll have this ramucirumab.
Okay, next please. Now this mutation helps us also to guide which are the ones which you are going to give. And next please. And why has the NCCN guidelines given category 1 recommendation? And if you see the FLORA trial, and the overall response rate is 80%, is one of the highest, and it gives you a median progression-free survival of 18.9 months. And so that is one of the highest ever quoted overall response rate and the median progression-free survival. Next please. So if MRI brain was positive for METs, what would be your ideal treatment? Dr. Mehar Lakshmi? Has Dr. Vishesh joined?
Brain metastasis, osimertinib is definitely the drug of choice. As we have seen, it delays the progression. There is impressive PFS rates even in those patients with CNS metastasis.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, next please. Yes, osimertinib is the drug of choice when you have because these targeted therapies have different CNS penetration rates, and the level of activity on the blood-brain barrier is different with the EGFR mutation. And if you see this particular curve where osimertinib has a maximum CSF plasma level almost 50%, which is not seen with others, and the brain plasma Cmax ratio is also very high. Next please. So the CNS progression-free survival, the full analysis sets is quite significant, having a hazard ratio of 0.48 with the median follow-up of 12 months. And this analysis has the third hierarchical statistical testing strategy, and the ORS data also shows statistical significant. CNS progression-free data is considered as clinically meaningful and statistically significant. Next, please. Okay, the FLORA, the CNS progression on first line osimertinib versus the standard, and that is the no known or unknown mutation was detected, those who has progressed, whether you gave osimertinib or a standard TKI. Next, what would be your second line, Dr. Suman?
After osimertinib.
After osimertinib.
After osimertinib, I generally do another testing, but it's still
see the mutation
only see the mutation testing. And if it's one of the rare mutations or
and Dr. Mehar Lakshmi, if you see the total list, so no, which drug do you consider safe, tolerable, they adds to the patient's quality of life, in this?
After osimertinib, the second line is only chemotherapy.
It's only chemotherapy, ma'am. Okay, fine. Now, if you have a choice of all the 6 combination, which would give you a good quality of life?
Immunotherapy.
Okay, but over here, yes, osimertinib. Yeah, osimertinib does have a good quality of life. If you take the TKIs and the chemotherapy like the pemetrexed, carboplatin, gefitinib, it had a lot of complications. Even the VEGF has its own complication. Chemo such is toxic, and allortinib, gefitinib, yes, it is cheaper, it's easily available.
No.
Even afatinib causes diarrhea and the skin rashes. Next,
I
please.
thought second line what functions to choose based on this. Okay.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Next, please.
No. When I was asking about the quality of life, I thought it's second line. What is the choice? So I said chemo.
Okay. Okay, ma'am. But do you agree with what I said? Out
Yes,
of all
definitely,
these six
madam.
drugs,
Osimertinib is the only drug which has shown good quality of life compared to any other TKI.
yeah. Next, please. Dr. Dr. Suman,
Yes, ma'am.
your thought process?
On safety, ma'am.
Safety, discontinuation rates.
Ma'am, discontinuation rates for osimertinib mainly due to financial toxicity. Otherwise, they will continue because it is, as the other speaker told, it is the most tolerable drug among any other EGFR. Apart from that, the other drugs, mainly afatinib and decombrin, they have painful skin and nail changes. So most of them discontinue for them, bleeding nails. I mean, the quality of life comes down. They're not able to button their shirt, comb their hair. So these are some things that is mainly the factor with afatinib. So you have to reduce from 40 to 30, then you stop, and then you lose the patient.
Yes.
For erlotinib and
Yes.
gefitinib, most it is brain mets. So once they develop brain mets, we lose the patient.
Yes, you are right. So if you see this chart, which tells us afatinib with grade 3 toxicity of 49%, diarrhea 14%, stomatitis 8%, and 16% of rashes. Whereas comparatively osimertinib, in the full chart, it has the minimum amount of AE, which is grade 3, as well as diarrhea, acne, rashes, all are very, very minimum compared to the cross-trial comparison. So definitely it is a trial with a lesser of the side effects and much proper safety pattern. Next, please. So the FLORA study also sequenced that if you first start with osimertinib and then you cross over, it gives you a better results comparing to any other sequencing strategies. And we heard from Dr. Meher Lakshmi's talk. And I think we can stop here because we have heard her talk. And Suman, your expert comments, and finally, Dr. Meher Lakshmi to tell a few words before we wind up the case-based discussion.
If you're
Put the
talking
next
about
slide, please. Yes.
No, if you're talking about only osimertinib, so osimertinib I generally prefer as a first line in these three subsets. One is patient already presenting with brain mets, so no other question, it could be osimertinib in the first line. Second subgroup of patient is adjuvant treatment for stage 2, stage 3 for planning and maintenance, especially for stage 3. Only osimertinib pairs that another two pairs. The third subgroup is patient already has T790M mutation in their profile. So that there is no other question we use osimertinib. So these are the three subsets which osimertinib has unquestionable use. And apart from that also, if financials are not a problem, then I tend to use osimertinib because of better quality of life and a promising longer PFS.
Okay, Dr. Meher Lakshmi, what is your experience with osimertinib in your clinical practice, and how long they have received, and how are they still continuing?
Patients, we had a few patients, madam. So a few of them on brain metastasis, and others who are on second line. All of them are doing quite well. 2.5 years with brain metastasis alone, and she's still doing well. And only last month she progressed, and I switched her to immunotherapy. And second line, around 1.5 years. Yes, 1.5 years. She was on osimertinib for 1.5 years. This is the maximum I can say. Other patients are continuing. They are absolutely no side effects. They are doing perfectly.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Meher Lakshmi, for your thought process. I think, yes, osimertinib is one of the best choices in our clinical practice. Yes, finance is not an issue. It's the drug of choice in non-small cell lung cancer, which is one of the drugs which has a very good tolerable safety pattern, has shown progression-free survival, has shown overall survival benefit. Yes, there is the sequencing also. Data has shown that if you start with osimertinib and you take it forward, we go up to 34 to 39 months of progression-free survival, and the patient can be given a benefit. Good quality of life is there and much safer than any of the other TKIs which are available in the market. I thank everybody, and I thank everybody. Thank you so much for participating in all the sessions in the case-based discussion. Can you hear me and see me?
Ma'am, we can hear you, but ma'am, your network is a little poor, so I have stopped your video.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Thank you so much. I invite Dr. Pavitran to sum up the entire meeting and give the concluding remarks.
Thank you.
Yeah, good evening, Dr. Anita. It was a very nice meeting. And as from the discussions, what is important is osimertinib is definitely now the first line, especially in the metastatic setting, as well as even in the adjuvant setting like post-op. And also, but only as mentioned, it is the main limiting factor is the cost. And when that is not possible, next best option may be gefitinib plus chemotherapy, which is shown to have almost equal survival in the two studies, the Japanese study as well as the study from Tata Memorial. So that are the two options, and with this, the survival of these patients has improved significantly and with minimal side effects. That's all what I have to say in short. Anita?
I think Dr. Anita has logged out. So thank you so much, Pavitran sir, for giving the closing remarks. On behalf of Dr. Anita Ramesh, Freedom from Cancer and AstraZeneca, we thank all the participants who were involved in this webinar. And once again, thanks to all our speakers and our moderators. With that, I would close the session. Thank you, everyone. And I wish everyone a good night.